The most expensive lie in personal finance is that all debt deserves the same level of fear. It does not. That misunderstanding has cost ordinary people more wealth than most recessions ever will. Because once you lump every debt into one emotional pile, mortgage, student loan, car loan, credit cards, personal loans, everything starts feeling equally ugly. And when everything feels equally ugly, people start throwing money at the wrong problem. They feel virtuous, they feel disciplined, they feel responsible, and all the while, the real wealth machine is being starved so they can win a battle that was never the urgent one. That is the trap. So let me give you the one mother line that everything in this story serves. Wealth is built by destroying expensive debt, preserving useful low-cost debt, and directing every freed-up dollar toward assets that compound faster than your cheap liabilities drain it. That is the line. Not debt free at all costs. Not borrow forever. Not emotional purity. Debt hierarchy. Because once you understand that, the whole map changes. A low-rate mortgage stops looking like an emergency. A federal student loan stops looking identical to a 24% credit card. A cheap car loan stops looking like a moral stain. High-interest consumer debt, by contrast, stops being an inconvenience and starts being what it really is. An active predator feeding on your future. That is the difference people miss. Now let me show you the mechanisms. The first mechanism is interest hierarchy. Most people organize debt by emotion. The car bothers them. The mortgage feels heavy. The student loan reminds them of an old chapter they want to escape. The credit card feels embarrassing, so they pay whatever hurts their identity most. That is a terrible system. Interest hierarchy means ranking debt by economic damage, not emotional discomfort. The question is not which debt annoys you. The question is which debt destroys the most wealth if left in place. A 24% credit card balance is not playing the same game as a 3.5% mortgage. A 10% personal loan is not the same kind of enemy as a 4% fixed federal student loan. The cost of capital decides the urgency. This sounds obvious. Very few people live by it. Because emotion is louder than arithmetic, a person making double mortgage payments while carrying revolving credit. Card debt is not being responsible. That person is performing responsibility while getting mathematically mugged. A person racing to kill a 3% loan while skipping retirement contributions with an employer match is not becoming prudent. They are refusing free money in order to solve the wrong problem. First, that is what happens when emotion outranks hierarchy. The wealthy do not ask whether debt feels ugly. They ask what it costs, what the alternatives return, and what flexibility that debt preserves or destroys. That is interest hierarchy. Now let us move to the second mechanism. I call it cheap capital advantage. This is where average advice collapses because it treats peace of mind as though it were always the same thing as financial intelligence. It is not cheap capital advantage means understanding that low interest debt can be a useful tool when the cost is low enough, and your alternative use of cash is materially stronger if you borrowed at 3% or 4% and can invest at 8%, 10%, or more over long periods, then paying off that cheap debt aggressively may feel clean. But it is often strategically inferior. This is the part that makes people uncomfortable. They were told freedom means zero debt, but zero debt is not the same thing as maximum wealth. A low-rate fixed mortgage is a good example. If the rate is low enough, the monthly obligation is manageable, and the alternative is putting excess capital into broad productive assets over time, then the mortgage is not your wealth killer. The obsession with erasing it early may be because every extra dollar sent into cheap debt is a dollar not compounding somewhere with higher expected long-term return. That does not mean recklessness. It means respecting spread. Cheap debt plus disciplined investing is one of the oldest wealth engines in the world. Rich people do not fear cheap capital. They use it. The problem is that ordinary households were taught to hate the word debt so much that they often destroy their own compounding just to feel clean faster. That is cheap capital advantage. Now let us move to the third mechanism. I call it liquidity preservation. This is another place where overpaying cheap debt quietly injures people. Cash has value beyond return. It has optionality. When you throw every spare dollar at a low-rate mortgage or a low-rate auto loan, that money does not disappear. But it becomes harder to reach quickly. It gets trapped inside home equity or sunk into accelerated ownership of a depreciating asset. The account balance falls, the emergency fund stays thin, a life event arrives. Suddenly, the person who is being disciplined has to use expensive debt again because all of their extra money was busy solving the wrong problem. That is liquidity preservation. This is why minimum payments on cheap debt can be strategically superior. Not only because the spread may favor investing, because cash in hand or cash in liquid accounts can defend your life better than equity. You cannot easily use without friction. Liquidity pays the repair bill, handles the job gap, funds the opportunity, absorbs the deductible, and keeps bad luck from turning into predatory borrowing. The person who aggressively prepays cheap debt often feels morally strong. The person who protects liquidity stays financially flexible. Flexibility wins more often than moral theater. That is liquidity preservation. Now let us move to the fourth mechanism. I call it human capital compounding. This is where low-interest debt analysis gets even more interesting. Sometimes the best use of extra money is not market investing right away. Sometimes it is increasing the value of your labor. That is human capital compounding. A federal student loan at a moderate rate is not ideal. It is also not always the emergency people imagine, especially if the borrower is still at a stage where retirement matches are being missed. Emergency funds are underbuilt, or skills that could raise income meaningfully have not yet been financed. If a dollar can either reduce a 5% loan or be used to secure a raise, a certification, a move into a better paid role, or a business capability with much higher return, then attacking the loan first may be strategically backward. This is why always pay debt first is such low-grade advice. It ignores sequence. A lot of early wealth building depends on upgrading earning power faster than lifestyle. If the worker remains underpaid, every future savings decision becomes harder. If income rises materially, every later debt and investing decision becomes easier. That means the return on self-investment can dominate the return from paying down certain moderate rate debts, at least for a while. The point is not to keep mediocre debt forever. The point is to understand that some debts are less urgent than the growth of the person carrying them. That is human capital compounding. Now let us move to the fifth mechanism. I call it match capture. This is one of the easiest ways people destroy free money while convincing themselves they are being conservative. An employer match on a retirement plan is not market speculation. It is a bonus hidden inside discipline. That is match capture. If your employer matches 50% or 100% on part of your contributions and you skip that in order to overpay a 4%, 5%, or even 6% debt, you are often making a mathematically indefensible move. A guaranteed match is an immediate return no normal debt payoff can replicate. And yet people do this all the time because debt freedom feels visible and the match feels abstract. That is why so many financially careful people remain underinvested. They are solving something emotionally satisfying while bypassing something economically superior. The correct order matters enormously here. Match first, then safety. Then strategic investing. Moderate debts can be handled according to their real urgency after those higher return moves are in place. A person who misses years of employer match because they were obsessed with becoming debt free quickly does not get those years back. The lost compounding is invisible. It is still one of the most expensive losses in the whole system. That is match capture. Now let us move to the sixth mechanism. I call it wealth engine redirection. Once you stop overpaying the wrong debts, the next question becomes decisive. Where does the freed up money go? That is where lives diverge. If the money simply drifts into spending, then all you did was change the surface without building anything. The real move is redirection. Broad market index funds, retirement accounts, Roth IRAs where appropriate, dividend, paying equity if it fits the overall plan, a real emergency reserve, cash flowing assets later. The exact mix depends on stage, but the principle is fixed. Cheap debt becomes tolerable only if the surplus is actually building assets. That is wealth engine redirection. A person keeping a cheap mortgage while investing consistently is playing one game. A person keeping a cheap mortgage while spending the difference on restaurants, subscriptions, and upgrades is playing a much worse game. Cheap debt is only useful when it leaves room for compounding elsewhere. Otherwise, it is just delayed consumption wrapped in financial language. This is the part many people get wrong. They hear, "Do not pay off cheap debt aggressively," and think it means relax. It does not. It means redirect with discipline. The whole power of the strategy is not what you stop paying. It is what you start building. That is wealth engine redirection. Now let us move to the seventh mechanism. I call it financial cancer. This is the debt that deserves aggression, not your 3% mortgage, not your fixed moderate federal student loan, not your cheap auto loan. I am talking about high-interest consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, predatory financing, payday debt, anything at rates that make investing, saving, and ordinary life mathematically subordinate to the lender. That is financial cancer. This debt does not wait politely. It compounds against you. It narrows your breathing room. It taxes your future self before your future self gets a vote. It turns bad months into longer bad years. This is why I make the distinction so sharply. People say debt is debt. Number 24% credit card balance is not a lifestyle inconvenience. It is an emergency. It outruns almost every reasonable investment return and eats cash flow that could have built the rest of your life. This is the one place where aggression is not optional. You kill this first with intensity. List it, rank it, attack the highest rate, roll the payment into the next. Stop carrying it, stop normalizing it, stop pretending points, perks, or convenience. Change the mathematics, because this is the debt that keeps people poor even when their income says they should be getting ahead. That is financial cancer. Now, I want to force the identity shift, because without it, this still sounds like debt advice instead of a real money philosophy. Stop thinking like someone trying to become debt-free as fast as possible. Start thinking like a capital allocator. A debt-free zealot asks how to eliminate every liability. A capital allocator asks which liabilities are expensive enough to kill, which are cheap enough to preserve, and where every freed dollar earns the highest strategic return. A debt-free zealot chases cleanliness. A capital allocator chases wealth. A debt-free zealot sees all debt as stain. A capital allocator sees hierarchy, spread, liquidity, and compounding. That is the stronger identity, because once you think that way, the whole map becomes clearer. Cheap capital advantage, liquidity preservation, human capital compounding, match capture, wealth engine redirection, financial cancer. These are not contradictions. They are one structure. Destroy what is predatory, preserve what is useful, and route capital toward long-term ownership. And now let me give you the operating system plainly. First, rank every debt by interest rate and structural damage, not by emotion. Second, stop aggressively prepaying low-cost debt under roughly the 5% range if the terms are fixed and the cash can earn materially more elsewhere over time. Third, always capture the employer match before overpaying moderate rate debt. Free money comes first. Fourth, protect liquidity. Do not trap all your optionality in cheap debt prepayments. Fifth, invest in your earning power, if that return is likely to dominate the debt payoff. Sixth, redirect every freed dollar into real asset building. The strategy fails if the money just becomes lifestyle. Seventh, go to war on high-interest consumer debt. That is the debt that deserves urgency. That is the heart of it. The point is not to be debt-free. The point is to be rich enough that debt serves your system more than it drains it. That is a completely different ambition. Now let me end where this really matters. You can keep treating every debt as equally toxic. You can keep throwing extra money at the liabilities that feel heavy while the truly destructive ones keep compounding. You can keep worshiping the emotional image of being debt-free while your investment accounts, liquidity, and future earning power stay weaker than they should. Or you can do the harder thing. You can rank the debts, you can kill the predators, you can preserve the cheap capital, you can capture the match, you can build the assets, and you can stop confusing financial purity with financial strength. That is the threshold, because the people who build serious wealth do not usually win by erasing every liability first. They win by understanding which liabilities are poison, which are tools, and which freed dollars can become a machine if they are finally pointed in the right direction. That is the mirror. Look into it carefully. If your current debt strategy still makes you feel responsible, but leaves you with too little liquidity, too little ownership, and too much lost compounding, then whatever else is true, the wrong debts may still be winning.